Hi, shalom friends. If I say the words tied up, what image do you conjure up in your imagination? Well, if you're, let's say, a Hollywood buff, you might have an image of a person tied up and the hijackers or the bad people are calling up his loved ones, whatever. But it's interesting that when you call up an office and you say, "Hi, can I speak to Mr. Smith?" and the receptionist responds, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's tied up right now," your next response is not to call 911. You understand, as a figure of speech, he's tied up means that he's occupied with something else. We have another expression, which is tied down. Actually, I don't know the rules of expression. When is it appropriate to say I am tied up? Or when is it appropriate to say I'm tied down? But many people won't get married because they don't want to get tied down. Or sometimes, occasionally, you might hear of a army that's tied down in a certain province because of this and this. In any case, both expressions, tied up or tied down, both convey a sense of immobility, or a sense of being in a place where you're not free to leave, or free to move, or free to expand. And there's another type of being tied up, which is really positive, and that is not being tied up nor tied down, but being tied to. For example, let's say you're tied to a safety harness. So now you could go to places of great danger, and ordinarily you would never venture there because of the great danger, but because you are tied to a safety harness, that gives you mobility, gives you the ability to do things, to expand your horizon, things that you would never do on your own. I would like to suggest that Jewish people are not tied up to the Torah, they're not tied down to the Torah, they are tied to the Torah. And when we are tied to the Torah and to our traditions, we're able to actually do things that ordinarily we would not feel capable of doing. So we're able to devise rituals, let's say morning prayer, for men especially to put on the tefillin. We are able to utilize days of the week for introspection or for family and both, because we're tied to the Torah. We're not doing this on our own. Actually, the Torah enables us and empowers us and says, now that you're tied to a 3,300-year tradition and culture, and most of all of holiness and divinity, now you can continue to enhance that experience, or to change that experience, or to perhaps manipulate some of it, because you have the power, you have that energy, because you're tied to something which is awesome. Let me share with you a Hasidic story that actually puts it in the most beautiful of perspectives. There's a small town, actually, or village, it was in Galicia, it was called Premishalan. I think it was called Premishalan. And one of the great sages at that time, his name was Rabbi Meir. And he was not only a great sage, but an incredibly kind person. He was known as a person where one could always receive advice and blessing, and his holiness was a byword. Miracles actually flowed through his holiness. Now, obviously, when you have reputations being spread, sometimes there is a sense of exaggeration, and there were two religious Jews who did not live in Premishalan, they lived elsewhere. And they heard these exaggerated stories, in their mind it was exaggerated, of a miracle worker that lived in Premishalan. They happened to go on a business trip, so they decided that, being that they were not too far from Premishalan, they would actually go to this town. When they come into the town, most of the town's people were devoted followers of Rabbi Meir, and of course, in the synagogue and in the marketplace and in the places of where they served food, they were always telling new stories and wonderful stories about the miraculous power of their rabbi. And finally, these two younger type of business people were saying, "Why are you guys so gullible? I mean, we've been in town already for two days. We don't see any miracles. All the miracles always happen somehow to someone somewhere that once visited. Is there anything that we could see in front of our eyes that proves that your holy man, your rabbi, your teacher, your Hasidic master is truly a person through miracles flow? And they said, are you kidding? You could see it every single day, a walking miracle. They scoffed. Really, what is that? He says, don't you know? We are currently in the winter. There's a lot of snow and sleet and ice. And essentially, the ritualarium or the mikveh is on a hill. During the year, most people take the shortcut and they walk up the hill and they get to the mikveh. However, in the winter, it's impossible to walk the hill without slipping. So instead, they actually have to go a bit out of their way because on the other side of town, they cut some steps into the hill and people walk up the steps, but they don't even try climbing the hill. However, Reb Meir, every minute of his day is reckoned, and he doesn't have the time to actually add another 10, 15 minutes of walking. So every morning, or perhaps late at night, when he goes to the mikveh, he walks up the mountain, or the hill, I should say really the large hill, and he goes to the mikveh and he never slips. And they look, and they're incredulous, and they say, that is a miracle? A man who walks up a hill and does not slip, that's by you. You're so simple, you Hasidim. Everything by you is a miracle. So they looked and they said, well, if you don't think it's a miracle, why don't you try it? They said, absolutely, we will. And a small crowd gathered, and it was early afternoon. It was plenty of light outside, and these two people start walking up the hill, which had been blanketed by snow in the past and was still freezing. The first fellow gets up maybe halfway, and he slips downwards and really gets bruised. The second fellow doesn't even get to half of it. As he's walking up the hill, he begins to slip immediately and falls and bruises his hands. And they're both black and blue, very uncomfortable. And they say, the Rebbe walks this every single day? And they say, yes, he's an elderly man. And they were chastened. Well, it took a couple of days for them to recover. Before leaving, they decided that they would apologize and ask for a blessing. They come in front of Reb Meir, and they say, you know, we were disrespectful to you. We spent the last 2 weeks in your city, and we doubted your powers, in italics, but now we see that you truly are an awesome, holy person, and we ask for your blessing. And he gave them their blessing. But then they said, Rebbe, can you give us a teaching as well? And he said, did it occur to you to ask me, why don't I fall? After all, you're both younger than me and certainly more athletic than I am. Why is it that I, an older man, is able to walk up this hill, even though there's slippery patches, whereas you, two younger people, cannot? They were silent. He said, I will tell you. Because Meir, when he walks, he's tied to heaven. And when one is tied to heaven, one does not fall on earth. Well, this teaching became one of the most popular teachings of Reb Meir. It sounds so much better in the Yiddish, as men is zugebunden Eiben. When you're tied to the one above, then you don't have to worry about falling below. So friends, whether you get tied up at the office or tied down at home, I don't know. But one thing I could tell you, we are tied to the eternal one. And when we are tied to the one above, we will have a secure footing below. Shalom.